Jesus had been teaching that he came from God and that God was his Father, but the Jewish leaders wouldn't believe him. They claimed to be true to Moses, their great ancestor. Well, Jesus said that even Moses would accuse them, and the conflict became hot. So Jesus got out of that place and he took his 12 disciples to the far shores of Lake Galilee into Gentile territory. He taught them a few things there, but what they remembered was what happened next. It was the season of the year to remember the defining event of the Jewish people, the Passover. About 1500 years before, when their ancestors were slaves in Egypt, there arose among them a great leader called Moses. He met God personally, and he talked to him on first name terms. And God had said that his name was I Am. By the power of God, Moses led them out of Egypt into a desert where they camped for 40 long years. And God fed them there, water and food, until they entered the promised land of Israel. Well, every year since then, they celebrated those events at the feast called Passover. Now, the Israelites of Jesus' day, they knew the story well, but they were having trouble figuring out where Jesus fitted into the picture of God at work among them, and a few more pieces of that puzzle were about to be put together. The disciples were sitting around enjoying Jesus' company in that deserted place, and they looked up to the sight of a great crowd approaching them. The people had walked right round the lake. They'd been so impressed by what Jesus was doing that they wanted to get some more of him, and they thought that Jesus was the Messiah that they'd been waiting for all these years. In fact, he might even be their king. They'd missed the connection with Moses. Well, the disciples and the crowd were all about to get a good lesson on that one. The stage is set out here in the desert. Seeing the great crowd, the hearts of the 12 disciples sink. They're meant to be taking a break from people, but Jesus welcomes the crowd. He sees it as an opportunity. And they keep coming, lots of them. There's a problem. People are hungry and it's meal time. In the middle of a hospitality crisis, right out here in the desert. They are guests, and Jews have this big thing about providing hospitality to guests. What are they going to do? And Jesus makes it the disciples' problem. And he says to Philip, Philip, where shall we buy food for all these people to eat? Philip feels stupid. There's no shops out here, no food anywhere. I mean, it's a test to see what he's been thinking. Philip does the maths. 8 months' wages would not buy enough food for each one of these to have even a bite, he says. He does the maths and it doesn't work. There's no shops. Even if there were, the shops don't stock this much food, and even if they did, we wouldn't have the ability to either pay for it or carry it back. The disciples just stand there, and Jesus is staring at them. They look at each other. They're stuck in the middle of a hospitality crisis. Well, Andrew finds a little boy with a packed lunch. 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. How embarrassing, taking a kid's lunch to solve their problem. And shrugging his shoulders, he breaks the awkward silence. Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. Small is the word. They are all feeling very small. Jesus is still looking at them, testing them to see what they're thinking until they feel totally inadequate, before he does what he's planned to do all along. Okay, Jesus, you've made your point. It's our job, but we can't cope. They're finally in the very place that Jesus wanted them to be, feeling inadequate and looking to him to solve their problem. This is the same lesson they've been getting right through their training. It's their job to help people. They don't know how to do it. They need to look to Jesus and need to trust him and draw on his resources because their own abilities are completely inadequate. Have the people sit down, Jesus tells them. So they scatter in 12 directions and have all the people sit down, all 5,000 men, plus their families. Philip brings the boy with his lunch, and he gladly gives it away to Jesus. He takes it in his hands, lifts his eyes up to heaven, and he gives thanks to God. And then he begins to distribute food. 4 loaves, more loaves, lots of loaves and small fish, the same as was in the boys' lunch. Well, men from each group come forward. Must have been 100 groups of 50 men each, plus their families. 5 to 10 men from each group come forward. And they collect enough food for themselves and for the rest of the group. They come right up to Jesus, and they each find plenty of food, laden with bread and fish. They take it back to their families and along with their report. You won't believe this, but there's plenty of food, and it's all coming out of the hands of Jesus. Where did he get it from, they all ask. Don't know, but take some. It's fresh, it's delicious, there's plenty. Well, where's Jesus getting it from? Now it's Passover season, and the story of the Passover is on people's minds. All their ancestors had eaten out in a desert. And here's Jesus, he's feeding them all. Some of them begin to make a connection here. Jesus did claim that God was his father, some say. It was God who provided our ancestors with food out in the desert, others say. Everyone's totally impressed. Well, the after-dinner discussion is on one theme. Who is Jesus? The disciples know that because after everyone had enough to eat, Jesus had said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over." So each took a basket and went out to each group, and they overheard the discussions about Jesus. Some of them were getting the Moses connection. Large crowd out in the desert, heaps of food from nowhere. Well, it must have come from somewhere. The men who brought the food back were trying to convince their group. It all came right out of the hand of Jesus. Really? More and more of the crowd begin to make the link. The very festival that they are here to celebrate is happening for real once again, right here among us. Passover, food from God. You don't mean that Jesus claims to be God? Was he the great leader that Moses used to talk to? Some were heard quoting what Moses had written from their own scriptures. The Lord your God will raise up from you a prophet like me, Moses, from among your own brothers. You must listen to him. Others agreed. Yes, this Jesus must be the one Moses was talking about. Food in the desert. Get the connection? Most of them were expecting the appearance of a great prophet who would be like another standout leader of theirs, David, who was a great warrior. But they'd overlooked the other writings about Messiah, which talked about him being humble and even suffering. Well, the disciples returned to Jesus after picking up the leftover pieces, and they each put their basket down. They are totally amazed. Not that there is so much left over, but so little. They each look at each other with this sinking feeling. Jesus has provided from his own hands exactly enough for 5,000 men and their families to have their fill. Then the 12 disciples have picked up the leftovers, and there's just enough for each of them. No more, no less. Well, that makes Jesus the host. This crowd are his guests, and the disciples are their servants, eating the scraps after the guests have eaten and after we've all cleaned up. The disciples had believed that Jesus was training them to be leaders, but here they are, having just obeyed orders to do the job of common servants, workers. Well, as this new thought is sinking in and they're picking the scraps of food, the crowd's getting louder. If this carries on, they'll soon be putting the pressure on Jesus to become the King of Israel. Jesus knows what they're thinking, and he leaves fast. He doesn't look back. He goes up a mountain all by himself, and that leaves the 12 disciples to face the crowd, who have questions. They want answers. We don't know the answers. We don't know where he got the food from. No, he's not going to be king, at least not today. No, we don't know where he's gone. And hey, we're just as confused as you are. By evening, the crowd have gone away. The disciples go down by the lake. There's no sign of Jesus, and they get into a boat and push off.